The reason that people get rigid, or the reason that people are rigid, is because we believe that it provides us comfort. If we know the rules, if we know how things are supposed to go, if we know who belongs in what box, then it just makes us feel like, okay, I got this figured out. And the flexibility is the ability to tolerate not having things figured out, not knowing exactly what's going to happen next, or even not really understanding yourself completely.
Welcome to Season 6 of Flusterclux with Lynn Lyons, where we talk about a family's anxiety and all the big feelings, too. We tackle the serious stuff without being too serious, and I'm your co-host, Robin. I'm Lynn's sister-in-law, and I'm here to ask your questions.
And I'm Lynn Lyons. I'm an anxiety expert, speaker, mom, and author, and I've been a therapist for over 30 years. Parenting can be a Flusterclux, and I'm here to help you find your way. I'll give you concrete steps to take and the words to say.
In this special 3-episode series, we're focusing on the 3 traits that are the core principles of Lynn's approach to helping families manage their anxiety. And last week we covered
Autonomy.
Today we're going to talk about flexibility. And I want to mention that in season 2, we launched with an episode on rigidity being one of the early signs of children who could be more prone to anxiety and anxious behavior. And I really recommend that you go back and listen to that episode after you listen to this one, if this is something that you feel like your family really needs to work on.
Yeah, there are certain temperaments that are more rigid than others. And the reason we really want to pay attention to rigidity, and it's interesting, is that we're talking about autonomy and problem solving and flexibility. And rigidity really gets in the way of all of those things. So the more rigid you are, the less autonomous perhaps you allow your children to be. The more rigid you are, the less capable you are of being a creative problem solver. So rigidity really flows through a lot of problems that we see. It's really one of the risk factors for anxiety and depression. So we really want to pay attention to that because it's something that you can really concretely and very consciously be aware of and shift in your family if that's one of the traits of your family.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, as a parent myself, I've heard this list from you for a few years. I have always tried to think about it in my parenting, but the longer I sit with your list, the more that I realize how it permeates through many other things. And so I used to think autonomy was this very specific, concrete thing, and we unpacked that a lot more in last week's episode. And I think flexibility and rigidity are the same thing. It might seem simple at the first glance, but you can unpack this and just get deeper and deeper and deeper.
Right. Well, when we think about flexibility, you think about it both externally and internally, right? External flexibility is when I really wanted to have pepperoni on my pizza, and then when they delivered the pizza, they forgot the pepperoni, and so now I have to manage that. It can be these little things that come up over and over again. Sort of, we talk about somebody being able to go with the flow or to be able to handle when things don't go a certain way. And you've heard me say so many times that when we're dealing with families that tend to be anxious, one of the things they try and do is to create real predictability, to create structure, to make sure that everything goes as planned. And flexibility externally means that when things don't go as planned, you're able to figure that out. It doesn't become catastrophic, and the whole family isn't held hostage by the need for things to be so rigidly planned. And then we can also think about flexibility, and this is probably much more prevalent or much more of an issue as your kids get older and move into adolescence, is the ability to be flexibly internally with yourself. Flexible about the way you perceive things, flexible about your opinions, giving yourself room to change and grow, giving yourself permission to move from one friend group to another, for example, or giving yourself permission to figure out what might be an activity that you would like to try versus something that you've done for a long time, but maybe you're a little bored with. that internal flexibility really shows up in adolescence and kids. We want to lay the groundwork, of course, as early as possible. But that idea that how do we be flexible in relationships? How do we be flexible in a way that allows us to experiment with things in a healthy way? That's a kind of flexibility that's really important also.
I would add, because I'm in that stage of parenting now, it's the rigidity of the lunch table politics, the sexual identity labels, the labels of having a mental health disorder.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain developmental stage where teenagers say, well, I'm this and I'm this and I'm this. And so what I'm hearing you say, and it makes perfect sense, is that there is a rigidity a bit of how to categorize the world, right? And not leave it open.
That's one of the things that happens is that when we see families that are more rigid, they might even have more rigid definitions about whether or not a child is doing well or not doing well, whether or not a child is depressed or not depressed. And being able to tolerate the flexibility of an emotional spectrum is really, really helpful.
Say we have parents who are listening who are new parents. And there is that moment when you have a 2 or 3-year-old that you serve them a meal and it's not the blue cup, because you specifically talk about the blue cup in our other episode.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really interesting litmus test right there. When your child, it's human nature at that age to want that predictability. But as a parent, how do you intervene and open up that so that we are going against our base instincts into moving into an evolved state of flexibility for our kids? How do we model that, right? I mean, isn't that kind of the journey?
Yeah, that's the journey. And the thing that you bring up that's really important to remember is that developmentally, there are certain stages in which predictability and rigidity in routine is really helpful and really important. That's why toddlers love reading the same book over and over and over again, because they learn from repetition. They learn from having things be predictable. I say this all the time, and I'm just going to say it again. This is not an all or nothing proposition. I am not saying that things either should be rigid or chaotic. I say to families all the time, you get to decide whether you want to be rigidly flexible or flexibly rigid. And being able to see that there's room, right? It's not a tightrope. It's a bridge. Let's use that example, right? So you've got a little kid and you sit down and they love the blue cup. The blue cup is their favorite cup, but maybe the blue cup is in the dishwasher or the dog chewed up the blue cup and you haven't gotten another blue cup yet. How do you say to your child, well, I'll tell you how, I'll say it. So you say, no,
I'll
just freaking say it. Okay. I'm just going to say it. So you say to your child, I know you love that blue cup. Oh my gosh, isn't it so great that when we sit down at the dinner table, there's your blue cup. And right now, we don't have the blue cup. And you really want the blue cup. Okay, so if we can't have the blue cup right now, what do you think we should do? Do you think we should use the red cup? And they're like, no, I want the blue cup. Now, this is where it comes in handy that you start saying, well, how can we pretend that the red cup is the blue cup? Maybe we could use a little magic right now that can help us get through this. Let's use our magic. And what should we do? Should we make a magic spell? Should we, let's use a magic wand. You grab a chopstick from the silverware drawer and you say, here's the magic wand, and boom. So now everybody else is going to see that the cup is red, but we're going to pretend that the cup is blue. Right? So with little kids, you can use that magic. You can use that creativity. I'll give you an example, actually, that happened in my house. Annie's macaroni and cheese, which my kids loved, I don't know if they still have it, but they had it for a while where you could get it with parsley flecks in it, like as if that made it so fancy. Maybe Annie was like, oh, parents will think they're feeding their kids something green, right? Okay. So it had parsley flecks in it. So my son, he was probably like 2.5 or 3, and he was like, I don't like the Annie's macaroni and cheese that has the parsley flecks in it. He probably didn't say it that articulately. And so we had this thing when I would accidentally buy the parsley flecked macaroni and cheese.
It was the one that was always on sale.
Right, probably, right. Oh, it's the only one that's left. Huh, how about that? Because nobody else's kids will eat it either. So I would say to him, all right, so we got to use some mommy magic here. I am going to get rid of the parsley flecks. you're not even going to taste them because you can't taste them anyway. And even though your eyes are going to see it, your tongue, we've gotten rid of it. And they would look at me like, okay, like you can do that? Sure. Yeah. So we would eat the parsley flecked Annie's macaroni and cheese using the magic that made them not taste the parsley, which they couldn't taste anyway. And then maybe later I would say, isn't that funny that it didn't really matter that we could handle whether or not it had parsley in it or not? So the next time that we accidentally buy the parsley flecked macaroni and cheese, it doesn't have to be such a big deal, does it? So being able with little kids, using that playfulness, using that idea of magic, which is very developmentally appropriate, to just insert this idea of flexibility. Okay, we're back. And the other thing you really want to do with little kids is you really want to note, and big kids too, by the way, but
hey, so Summer Olympics season is upon us. And what are you looking forward to most? Are you a gymnastics fan? Do you tear up watching those medal ceremonies? Or how about that opening ceremony that's always mind-blowing? The Summer Olympics in Paris is in full swing, but hydration is key not just for the athletes, but the fans too. And Liquid IV is extraordinary hydration for physical endurance, mental clarity, and overall well-being. A single stick of Liquid IV delivers better hydration than water alone and 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 vitamins and nutrients. You just tear, pour, and enjoy in a glass of water. And your ordinary glass of water becomes something extraordinary with so many true-to-fruit flavors, including pear, strawberry lemonade, sugar-free white peach, sugar-free raspberry melon, and lemon lime. Liquid IV can be that perfect fairway companion on the golf course, laying out by the pool, or hiking up that mountain. I even love how easy those sticks are to travel with. You'll never get dehydrated from a long flight. Liquid IV is the #1 powdered hydration brand in America, and it has 4 delicious sugar-free flavors: white peach, green grape, raspberry melon, and lemon lime. A 0-sugar hydration solution with no artificial sweeteners, clinically tested to hydrate more than water alone. So turn your ordinary water into extraordinary hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code FLUSTER at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code FLUSTER at liquidiv.com.
So what is Earth Breeze? Earth Breeze looks just like a dryer sheet, but it's ultra concentrated, liquidless laundry detergent, and it is the best of all worlds. Earth Breeze is tough on stains and odors while being kind to the planet and your skin. No more heavy lifting or measuring sticky blue goo from a massive plastic jug that will end up in a landfill. Earth Breeze's lightweight cardboard packaging takes up a fraction of the space in your laundry room versus traditional detergent. I even keep a few sheets in my suitcase, so I always have laundry detergent on me no matter where I travel. Earth Breeze offers flexible subscriptions delivered via carbon offset shipping right to your door for free. Because unfortunately, you'll never run out of laundry, but now you'll also never run out of detergent. I think you should give it a try, and if you decide to go back to your old stuff for some reason, you'll get a full refund on your Earth Breeze purchase. No questions asked. 500 million detergent jugs end up in landfills and oceans every single year. So make a positive impact on the world where it doesn't have to come at a cost to you. My clothes are clean, they smell great, and I feel like I actually did something good just doing my laundry. Right now, Flusterclux listeners can receive 40% off Earth Breeze just by going to earthbreeze.com/Flusterclux. That's earthbreeze.com/Flusterclux to cut out single-use plastic in your laundry room and claim 40% off your subscription. earthbreeze.com/Flusterclux. Step into summer with style and ease thanks to one of our favorite sponsors, Jenni Kayne. I have found a brand I'm completely obsessed with. Jenni Kayne is a California brand through and through. Think minimalist and refined with pieces like luxurious cashmere sweaters and iconic accessories. And they're clothes that you never want to take off, not to mention the most incredible home essentials too. Jenni Kayne is here to help you live your best season yet. And for a limited time, our listeners get 15% off their first order. Go to jennikayne.com and use the code FlusterClux15 to get 15% off. Their sweaters are the quintessential must-have item, and this season especially, I can't get enough of their cotton collection. The cotton cocoon cardigan and the Chloe crew neck have been my staples. And Jenny Kane is known for their super luxe yet lightweight sweaters. Trust us, they do relaxed knits better than anyone. If you need something luxurious to add to your vacation wardrobe, I've been loving the Flynn cashmere sweater. It's so versatile. You can dress it up or you can dress it down. Jenny Kane believes in the art of simplicity. They focus on comfort, quality, and timeless design, so you can curate a wardrobe that never goes out of style. And they have shoes too. And shoes too. The Eve sandal is everything you could ever want in a classic summer shoe. And when you go to the website, you'll notice they also have a stunning collection of home essentials, timeless furniture pieces, cozy pillows and throws, and perfectly curated decor. Find your new uniform at jennykane.com. Our listeners get 15% off their first order when you use code Flusterclux15 at checkout. That's 15% off your first order, JENNIKAYNE.com, promo code Flusterclux15. Let getting dressed be one thing less to worry about. Embrace your summer aesthetic with Jenny Kane.
With little kids, you really want to notice and you really want to make, you don't have to throw a parade, but you really just want to note for them out loud that you really appreciate how flexible they were. That you say, we were really pressed for time and we had to get to this thing, or we were really trying to get out of the house for school. And I know you wanted to wear those red socks. They were in the dryer. And boy, I saw you using that flexible brain of yours. And that was so helpful. Thank you so much. Just throw that in there on a regular basis so that kids begin to hear from you that flexibility is a value that you appreciate. And the flip side of that is make sure that you as a parent aren't making rigidity the value that you appreciate. That can be very common in families. Like, this is the way that things are supposed to be. We talked about this in the previous episode with autonomy, in terms of clothes and perfectionism and that kind of stuff. Make sure that you are not modeling, this is the way things are, my way or the highway. You have to do it this way. We need to make sure that we leave at this exact time every time. Then you're modeling rigidity.
Right. And then the other thing we've mentioned in another episode too is that when you have very specific rules as a family around bedtime, for example, occasionally break those rules and
That's
say,
right.
We have rules around bedtime, but you know what? Sometimes we're going to do things that are different. Tonight's one of those nights because we're going to see a movie, or we just feel like staying up a little bit later and playing this game. And it's okay to constantly change according to the situation.
Right. If you can convey to your kids that within the structure that is really helpful that keeps our lives on track, if flexibility is a value that you appreciate. Because then what happens when they get older and they're trying to figure out who they are, and they're trying to navigate tricky social waters, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to make decisions and this and that. If you have laid down that groundwork, that flexibility is a value that you find helpful, they're going to benefit from that in ways that you can't even predict when they're 5 or 7 or 9. Having a 13-year-old that is able to flexibly deal with social drama, having a 16-year-old that can flexibly deal with making decisions about what courses that they're going to take, having a 16-year-old that's able to be flexible about when they're going to fit drivers into their schedule and when they're going to get their license. All of those things just make their lives and your lives easier. It really is a part of good mood management too, right? The ability to be flexible, the ability to recognize change is okay, that it's valuable. Rigidity makes life harder. It just makes life harder.
Give us an example of a tween social drama that has flexibility leading it or that has rigidity leading it. So I'm thinking of some sort of middle school situation where a flexible kid versus a rigid kid is approaching the same situation.
So let's think about group projects, because group projects are very prevalent in the tween years, right? You're doing a group science project or something like that. And if you've got a kid who's very rigid, The project is supposed to be done a certain way. It needs to be completed a certain way. They want to get the 100%, and they're assigned in the group with a child who, for whatever reason, doesn't have the skills, doesn't have the organization, doesn't have the interest. That becomes oftentimes, if you go into that with rigidity, and if parents go into that with rigidity, then it becomes an issue of, how do I make sure that my child does this perfectly, or that my child does this well, that they don't have any struggles with it, and the other child becomes the scapegoat? So you begin saying, my child is very good at handling this stuff, and that other child isn't doing what they want. And then the conversation, which I've had many times in my office, the conversation is, why did my child get assigned that child? Right? I mean, it becomes really, you're modeling that unless you live up to my standards, you're not good enough for me to do this project with. If, on the other hand, you start saying to your child, this looks like it's a tricky fit. This looks like this is going to be difficult. Let's figure out what you have to do in order to get through this project. Because the teacher probably knows that they assign somebody who's disorganized with somebody who's super organized. And this child is going to struggle through this in a way that you're probably not. Let's think about how we can be flexible. Flexibility allows for empathy. Instead of seeing something through only your eyes, instead of seeing something through the rigid eyes of judgment, you're allowing your child to step back and recognize that maybe the child that's doing the project doesn't have a mom that can drive them to Michael's to get all the crafts, the supplies necessary for the project. Maybe this child struggles in a way that you're not used to struggling. When you talk about it in a flexible way, instead of focusing on the rigid grade, the rigid outcome, it allows for empathy. It allows for connection. It allows them to see the situation in a different way. All of that is so helpful. So helpful. Yeah, that would be an example of rigid versus flexibility. That's sort of a social/academic drama, but it's one that comes up all the time when I'm talking to rigid kids.
Yeah, it seems like if you're on a sports team, if you have a really strong player, but that strong player still can't advance as far because there are some teammates who aren't at that level. That stronger player has to learn that my efforts get combined with others, and that flexibility of not pursuing that perfection. We just don't have control over a lot of this. I mean, that's what I'm also hearing, is that you're just explaining to kids, we don't have control over how we're evaluated often. There will be other factors, and it's good to learn to shrug it off with a smile.
To normalize it too. Like you say, we don't have a lot of control. It's sort of the whole college admissions process and choosing a college. There's some things you can do and some things you can't do, but ultimately, we don't have a lot of control over whether or not they pick you to go to that college. There are all sorts of factors in play. Once you get to college, there are an enormous amount of things that are out of your control, right? Who's your roommate? And what I see with families that are rigid is that oftentimes there is a real effort to control that process, to be rigid about the process, when it's really an opportunity to talk about flexibility. So one of the experiences I think that's interesting now, if we talk about rigidity and flexibility, asking for a single room in college has become a pretty common thing, that you can't handle living with somebody else. Going off to college and being assigned a roommate is one of the most amazing experiences of flexibility that you can have, particularly if you didn't share a room with a sibling growing up, which is less and less common, right? Now kids generally, not only do they have their own bedrooms, sometimes kids have their own bathrooms, right? So this idea of moving into a dorm, having a roommate, having to share space with somebody in a way, if you don't prime your child for that, if your child doesn't have any experience with having to compromise or do things another way, it becomes a little tricky when you move in. Kind of a funny story. I was just talking to a young girl who's just started her freshman year in college. She came in to see me. She's going to a local college, so she's near home and her parents can keep an eye on her, and there are reasons for that. But she said that there's a sign on the bathroom door. She's a little bit naive. No having sex in the bathroom. She did not even know that that was a possibility. This whole experience for her has been one of flexibility. It's been really, really challenging for her, but also really wonderful. She feels very proud of herself.
I think one of the more challenging roommate situations I heard was actually your son's freshman year.
Yeah, he arrived on campus. He didn't know who his roommate was going to be. His roommate was 20 years old, so he was entering his junior year, but he was on the spectrum. And he had gone to a program close to home for 2 years for his freshman and sophomore year, and was now moving away from home for the first time and roommates with my son, who was a freshman. And it was challenging because this boy was on the spectrum, which means that there were a lot of things he did that were incredibly rigid. I think one of the most challenging was that his alarm, I think either on his phone or on his watch, was set to go off at 1 a.m. And my son kept asking him if he could change it. And this young man was adamant that he was not to change his alarm, that the alarm had to stay the way it was. So every day, an alarm went off at 1 a.m. Now, sometimes my son was asleep and sometimes he wasn't because it was his freshman year in college. So in the face of this rigidity, which he understood, and he was frustrated, but he's a nice kid and he was very empathic. He knew that this boy was on the spectrum, but it was really challenging.
And it all started with that parsley on the mac and cheese.
That's right.
He's like, I can handle this.
Yeah. I was like, use your mommy magic to pretend that it's just crickets. It's not really an alarm going off. Well, and ultimately what he did after his first semester, a bed opened up in one of his friends' rooms and he moved. My son moved. He talked to his roommate about it. His roommate didn't really seem to care. He was sort of like, sure. So he was flexible. And my younger son's college has been a lesson in flexibility because he transferred after freshman year too. So he was constantly looking at how can I handle what I have to handle and how can I be open to changing what I can change.
When you talk about the rigidity of label, and I think of all of these examples that I've heard in the teens I'm around where there's a rigidity about, well, I have depression or I have anxiety. They want their mental health diagnosis to be their identity, which drives you crazy.
It does, admittedly.
They also, tweens and teens to a degree, the popular kids, right? Labeling who's in or who's out in what group. Do you feel like that need to categorize people from theater kids, goth kids, all of these different labels, is that because it becomes developmentally something that most kids go through?
Yeah.
It's like an age appropriate thing as they're figuring out who they are.
It's that quest to sort of figure out where you belong, that search for belonging. I think human beings are really tribal. It's the desire to identify with a group because it gives you that sense of belonging, because you want to be on the in and you don't want to be on the outs. But I'll tell you, it's interesting as you bring this up. I'd love to tell you about this study that was done a few years ago that really addresses this, looking at stress in teenagers through high school. Okay, so now back to the show. So there was a guy named David Yeager, and he and his colleagues, the question that they were trying to...
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. As your kids get older, some things about parenting get easier. Maybe not getting your kids to bed, but at least they can start to dress themselves. Other things don't, like having that conversation about money. And the fact is, kids won't really know how to manage their money until they're actually in charge of it. And that's where Greenlight can help. Greenlight is a debit card and money app made for families. Parents can send money to their kids and keep an eye on kids' spending and saving, while kids and teens build money confidence and lifelong financial literacy skills. With the Greenlight app, kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely, thanks to games that teach money skills in a fun and accessible way. The Greenlight app also includes a chores feature where you can set up one-time or reoccurring chores, customized to your family's needs, and reward kids with an allowance for a job well done. This is my favorite part of the app because I confess I was a mom who wasn't always good at remembering to pay when I finally got the kids to do the specific tasks I asked, and Greenlight has come to the rescue. Millions of parents and kids are learning about money on Greenlight, and it is the easy, convenient way for parents to raise financially smart kids and families to navigate life together. Sign up for Greenlight today and get your first month free when you go to greenlight.com/fluster. That's greenlight.com/fluster to try Greenlight for free. Greenlight.com/fluster. If you're a new parent, a bad day means you either ran out of coffee, diapers, patience, or all of the above. Stocking up on a cold brew and deep breaths are all you. But at least Hello Bello's got your baby's butt covered. Hello Bello believes all families deserve premium, affordable baby products. With their ultra-convenient diaper bundle subscription service, includes 7 packs of diapers and 7 packs of plant-based wipes. You'll never run out of supplies, and better yet, they're delivered to your door. Set, change, and cancel your delivery schedule whenever you want. Never have that horrible feeling where you reach into your diaper stash and find out there's only one left, and you know that won't get you through the morning. You'll never have to experience that again. With what New York Magazine calls the best diaper subscription and winner of the 2022 Good Housekeeping Parenting Award, Hello Bello will keep you well stocked on diapers and wipes. Go to hellobello.com/fluster to get 30% off your first customized bundle and a full-size freebie product of your choice. That's hellobello.com/fluster to start bundling with 30% off your first order. Don't forget, that's hellobello.com/fluster.
Address was, how do we make high school less stressful for teenagers, which is a big question to ask. So this is what they did. Incoming freshmen, they talked to them about the fact that they weren't done yet. And in particular, they referenced what they referred to in the study as their socially relevant traits. And they did some reading exercises, they did some writing exercises during those first few days of freshman year. And the message that they offered, which was a very simple message, was that people can change. And it was intended to instill a basic, almost banal message to help them manage tension. People can change. And what they found, because then they followed these freshmen through their sophomore, junior, senior years, is that these freshmen reported, as they moved through high school, less stress, less tension, because somebody had said to them, you can change. You are not done yet. You know, this is what Carol Dweck talks about with the fixed mindset and making sure that we give the message to kids that they are works in progress, that their brains are malleable, that they are not this one thing. If you think about the Breakfast Club, right? I mean, that's what the whole Breakfast Club, that whole movie was about. How do we break down these tribal identifications? How do we get to know people more than just their labels that they all had? That's what that movie was about, of course. So giving that message to kids, if you've got an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, being able to give them permission to change and grow, to try on different things, to figure out which groups that they can be in and move between groups, right? It's a quest for this sense of belonging. And then it becomes kind of rigid. And they want to identify themselves in a way that they feel like will allow them to be a part of a group.
You know what this reminds me of? It's one of the most powerful hours you can spend watching something. Did you watch the Michael Apted documentary series that chronicles a group of children in London over the course of their lives? And it started with age 7 and they're now in their 60s. It's called 7 and Up, 14 and Up. I can't believe you haven't seen this.
We could do a whole episode entitled, I Can't Believe You Haven't Seen That.
I know you and I
to me
could.
a lot.
It's amazing because the premise was, show me the 7-year-old and I'll show you the adult.
Mm-hmm.
So then it shows people at 14 and 21 and 28. Mm-hmm. And as you watch it, you can't help but see an incredibly powerful shift, obviously from that 7-year-old soul to the 14-year-olds, because of the 14-year-old
mm-hmm.
becomes much more introverted, shy, questioning. They're at a very rocky period in personal development. And the 21, you start to see them go out of it. But you're looking at people who cross different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races, different neighborhoods from London. That was the idea. And one of the things that's so great if you had a teenager and you watched some of these series together is you can talk about those people and say, look at how differently they changed when they were teenagers. But it is funny how the 45-year-old and the 7-year-old really sort of displayed the same level of optimism and sense of humor. And that's how they chose to display themselves to the world. We're not permanent. You always talk about permanence.
I was actually just listening to a podcast this morning with Catherine Sanderson, who does a lot of research on happiness. She was a guest on the podcast. She brought up a really interesting point. She said, we tend to say about kids and we tend to say about ourselves, oh, well, I'm just more naturally optimistic, or I'm just more naturally flexible. And we know that temperament has a role in it. Our environment has a huge role in it. But what she was saying, which I thought was such a good reminder, is that if you don't see yourself as naturally happy, that means that you have to work at it harder. And it really is possible to have a more optimistic or a happier outlook. It's sort of like if you're not as naturally gifted at the piano, then maybe you have to practice more. Or if you're not as naturally gifted at fill in the blank, you have to figure out how to improve your skills. I loved her message because it was really just the message I give all the time, that it's about recognizing where the gap is and developing the skills. I think where the rigid sort of labeling permanence comes in is when we accept about a child, or we say to a child, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and a family-fulfilling prophecy, this is the grumpy one. This is my anxious one. This is my happy one. They will live up to those expectations. One of the homework assignments that I give to older kids all the time, and I want classroom teachers to do this too when I'm talking to schools, is I want you to have a discussion about the ways in which you've changed compared to 2 years ago. Or, with the pandemic now, we can say, what's different about you now compared to when COVID started? What are the opinions that have evolved for you, or your tastes, or your relationships over the last 5 years? Because that is just a way to get kids to look at this idea of evolving and changing. Because I think it is so easy to just label kids. And, as you said, it drives me crazy that we would say about an 8-year-old, well, they have depression, or this is who they are, without really recognizing how malleable and flexible our brains are, our personalities can be. I'm never going to be an introvert. That's not going to happen. But I was just thinking last night as I was in bed on a Saturday night at 8:30, totally psyched that I was going to be watching the morning show. I was thinking to myself, I cannot even imagine going out and socializing with anybody on a Saturday night. And I'm a pretty extroverted person. That has changed in me. I don't want to go out. I don't want to socialize except with a very small group of people. So being aware of this larger idea of flexibility, paying attention to those early rigid signs and recognizing developmentally that little kids want things to go a certain way. We're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But as your kids hit those developmental stages of middle school and high school, letting them know that flexibility is a value that you appreciate and that is enormously helpful and enormously important to them as they move through life. That's the message that I want to give.
Let's take it one more step into the concrete, because all of a sudden you have a tween or a teen who's talking about what they're observing at school or their friends, and you're hearing a lot of labels in their conversation. What's that pep talk you can say, I hear you're using a lot of labels to describe people, but let's talk about labels and how they do or don't serve you.
That's a great way to introduce that topic, to say, I hear that you're putting a lot of labels, and, then you make them watch The Breakfast Club, of course. But you want to say, is there anybody that you know that you put a label on that then you found out that there was more to that person than that label? Let's think about that. And then maybe you have an example of that. For me, it was Lisa Simmons in 7th grade, which was a terrible year for me. Lisa Simmons was so pretty. Her hair feathered back perfectly. She knew how to wear eyeliner in a way that to me was just mysterious. She was one of the prettiest, most popular girls in 7th grade. And I was intimidated by her just from afar. I had a label on her. She was somebody who was she was going to hurt me, right? Because those girls had not been nice to me in the past. She was so kind to me. She was so sweet to me. I'm sitting here thinking about Lisa Simmons in 7th grade. She was the most popular, prettiest girl in the class and was probably the girl who was the nicest to me. And I think that that's a really helpful story to share, those kind of stories. What about the kid who was the big, huge jock that you thought was a real whatever, and then you found out that after school he would go to a nursing home and visit his great-grandmother? What are the ways that we can poke holes in those labels so that we allow our kids to see that we're not just unidimensional? We don't have this rigid label.
You want your kids to turn that exercise onto themselves. Mm-hmm. What labels do you choose to apply to yourself, and what labels do you think others do, and why? And are those really serving you? And are those accurate?
Wouldn't it be a great question to say, what do you think if somebody labeled you? What would be a label that somebody could give you that would be really wrong to you? What might somebody think about you that you're sitting here thinking, that's not me. I can't believe they think that about me. Yeah, to turn it on them. Would somebody say that you're this and that doesn't fit for you? Or somebody said that you're this and that doesn't feel like who you are at all? That's a really good way to have them begin to think about that as it pertains to themselves.
And with that education, then the goal is for them to be conscious of that instinct to label and use that less and less of a crutch for themselves and for others.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so the goal here was to have you all think about flexibility in a really broader way, knowing that when your kids are little, so if you are listening to this and you've got little kids, that you're going to teach flexibility in a pretty concrete way, because it's going to be about the blue cup. It's going to be about being able to manage when they're not tall enough to ride the roller coaster because they are an inch too short. It's going to be those concrete things. And then think about it developmentally about how you're just going to take that pretty concrete idea of flexibility and let it just expand into broader categories, right? Flexibility about who you are, flexibility about how you label other people, flexibility about your emotions, flexibility about the decisions you make, the people that you associate with, the problems that you're going to have to deal with. This idea of being a flexible human being is one that should start when they're tiny and that you're just going to keep on working on, particularly as they're moving into the teen and tween years, because socially flexible people do better. Being socially flexible allows you to connect, allows you to have that sense of belonging with a lot of different groups. So it's not so risky that if you're not in this group, then you're on the outs. Thinking about this broad idea of flexibility. And here's the question for all of you. How am I going to make sure that I am both modeling and directly talking to my kids about the value of flexibility? It's not all or nothing. I'm not trading in rigidity for chaos. But how am I going to promote that as a very worthwhile value in my parenting, in my family, in my own life too? That's what I want people to think about. Thanks for listening. And if you found this podcast helpful, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find this information.
And if you'd like to dig deeper on any of these topics, we have specialized playlists on our Spotify profile, and the link is in the show notes. Topics like teens, depression, and OCD. Bye, Lynn.
Bye, Robin.